hopefully we'll have a chance to have a dialogue and get as many questions answered as possible. I thought I'd start with just some history about how all of this came to be. So for many of you, you'll remember 15 years ago, after the riots, there was a commission. It was called the Can Commission, and it was a group of leaders who wanted to change some of the underlying issues that led to the events leading up to the unrest and the unrest itself. They broke into several groups, and from that work came a number of initiatives. One was the police reforms, or the collaborative agreement, if you remember that, and another had to do with accelerating or investing, supporting minority-owned businesses, and there's still a minority business accelerator at the Chamber of Commerce that's still in effect. The education group focused their attention on early learning and development, and they created, working with the United Way, Success by 6. And over the course of the last 12 to 13 years, Success by 6, led by Stephanie Bird, many of you may know Stephanie, has been focused on those things that will have the most impact on supporting children in the early years, the first 5 years of a child's life. These are really significant years in terms of development, particularly brain development. And through significant investments and research and evaluation, the United Way determined that there were two big priorities and strategies to focus their giving and their advocacy work around. One had to do, or has to do, with home visitation and working with moms who need some additional support prenatally and then in the first 3 years of her child's life, to make sure that there's a strong bond between the child and the mother, to ensure that whatever the mom is struggling with, sometimes it's postpartum depression, or it's a drug or alcohol addiction, or it's just health, because there's so much chaos and struggle in that person's life. They get that help, and it makes a big difference in terms of the development of her child. The second strategy has to do with quality access to quality daycare and preschool. And so for the last decade or longer, the United Way has been investing in those two strategies, and in many ways those are the two most significant priorities for the United Way. In fact, the United Way has 3 bold plays. One is to dramatically expand home visitation, that first strategy, which is run by Every Child Succeeds. The second is to provide, bless you, a universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds, high quality preschool. And then the third bold play has to do with good paying jobs for an additional 15,000 people in our region. So, after several years, Jim Zimmerman, the head of Macy's was very involved in the beginning of Success by 6, set out with the United Way to raise an additional $10 million to invest in these two strategies and to build a data system to help inform policymakers that these were really significant investments, that they had significant returns, that they would save taxpayers lots of money. And so that $10 million was invested in expanding home visitation and expanding access to quality preschool and building a data system that they called Winning Beginnings. That was the name of the campaign. And the goal was not just to invest $10 million and to expand these programs and to build this data system, but to do so in a way that was so compelling that they could secure long-term public funding for something we know works. At the moment, particularly in Ohio, Kentucky's not so far off, Ohio ranks at the bottom of the list in terms of investing in early learning. And this was the United Way's attempt to secure additional public funding by saying, hey, we'll go in first with $10 million, we'll invest wisely, we'll build this data system, and we'll have the data to prove it, and then they did. The data are compelling in terms of the significant impact that quality preschool has on school readiness and the savings that that provides to our schools, what that means in terms of the long-term success of that student, savings to the criminal justice system, more people getting jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The challenge is that the economy fell apart, and they've never been able to secure that public funding that was part of the Winning Beginnings campaign. Then about 3 years ago, 40 or 50 of us went out to Denver and on a leadership exchange trip led by the Chamber to look at all of the things that were working in Denver. Denver's a growing city, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and all kinds of things are at the heart of that. The governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper, who was mayor for a long time, spoke to the group and said, you know, at the end of the day, the most significant thing he was part of, that the Chamber in Denver led, was an effort to secure local funding through a sales tax to provide universal preschool for 4-year-olds. And it was just renewed in 2014, so they're 10 years into it. Other cities across the country have pursued a similar path. So New York, Mayor de Blasio secured $300 million to expand access to universal preschool for all 4-year-olds in New York. Seattle passed a deal to provide 3- and 4-year-olds with access to quality preschool, but on a pilot basis. San Antonio passed an initiative to build 4 giant preschools. There's about 15 cities that have done something similar. And building off of all of those cities, spending the last really decade and then more intensely the last 3 years looking at all of the research and all of the data and best practices, what other cities have done really well, where they've come up short. And Denver's come up short in a couple of areas. We have been hosting town hall meetings and community forums and brought together a steering committee of about 40 plus people, very diverse group of folks from all sectors, to begin to vet a series of decisions as to what would make the most sense here in Cincinnati. And they are slowly but surely arriving at a point where they're going to make a recommendation to the community as to what makes the most sense. Learning from all of these other cities, how do we build the best possible program, provide access to high quality preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds, but to do so in a way that takes what has worked in other cities and figure out what to do differently in those situations where things haven't worked. Along the way, the group has asked for several things. One is they wanted a lot of feedback from providers, so we hold several sessions with providers. And there are lots of people providing preschool. So the largest provider is the public school system. Then you have the Community Action Agency and Head Start. The YMCA has preschools. Cincinnati Union Bethel has preschools. Then you have these independent providers, many of whom are minority owned and operated. You have home-based providers, et cetera. The state is requiring that all of them get to quality, which the state defines and helps people achieve by the year 2020. But like many things, the state did not provide any funding to these providers to get to quality. So it's a big issue. And the steering committee wanted to hear from providers, and so there have been sessions, I don't know, over a dozen, including one last night where some 60 providers came to share their thoughts, what would work for them, what wouldn't work, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to hear from parents, and so we convened a parent advisory group, and they have met with parents from all income levels, but particularly low-income families. And they wanted to get a sense of really an independent sense from a group that was ultimately hired, the RAND group, which has provided strategic thinking and consulting for states and cities around this issue. What does the literature say? If you look at all of the research and all of the data, what does make the most sense? A full landscape analysis, where are we in terms of where are there preschools, where are there quality preschools, where are the kids, to be able to map all that out. One of the flaws in the Denver program is they didn't do that, and they still haven't, and so the vast majority of the money goes to low-income families, but there are these pockets in Denver where we would call them, quality preschool deserts, where you have kids who need it, but there aren't quality preschools there. And we don't want to make that same mistake. We want to build a system where there are quality preschools all over. Now, they did do it in a way that dramatically improved the number of quality preschools from 45 when they started to 260, so a 500% increase in the number of quality preschools. But they still have these pockets in Denver where there are kids who don't have the access that they should.
So, question?
Yeah.
So, are these deserts because there are no facilities where these